Outside gate number 5 of the Melbourne Cricket Ground, you will see a statue of Sir Donald Bradman. But why? Let's find out.
Australia's first true sporting hero was the immortal Victor Trumper, one of the great batsmen of cricket's golden age. Trumper's untimely death at the age of 37 from kidney disease in June 1915 was headline news in papers across Australia and in England. On the other side of the world, the young nation was facing its baptism of fire in the trenches of Gallipoli. The heroism of the Australian soldiers gave birth to the Anzac legend. Australia needed new heroes, and they were to find one in the most unlikely of places. In the New South Wales country town of Bowral, there was a young boy who was destined to become Australia's first truly international and greatest sporting hero.
They mention about being a truly international sporting hero. For my subscribers and viewers outside of Australia, have you heard of Don Bradman? That would be my question, because I had never heard of him, but I'm not a cricket person, so it's not someone I would know. Do you know of him?
His name was Donald George Bradman. The young Bradman spent hours honing his hand-eye coordination by hitting a golf ball with a cricket stump against the tank stand at the back of the family home in Bowral.
Yeah, hitting a golf ball up against a tank stand with a cricket stump is near impossible. I think I've tried it a couple of times, and maybe at 2 in a row, that was the best. But seeing Sir Donald Bradman on that footage hit 3 or 4, that's pretty amazing. I would have liked to have seen whether he carried on and got 5 or 10, but I'm sure he would have had to miss it at some stage to prove that he was human.
I suppose if you can hit a golf ball with a thin stick, then you should be able to hit a cricket ball with a cricket bat. The logic's there, I would say. I would think that is the line of thinking he would have been going down. If I can hit, this small ball with a tiny stick over and over again, it reminds me of when I was a kid and you're kicking the ball against the garden wall, and controlling it yourself. It's that thing you can do on your own to try and improve your game. And that's a great story, and I love that there's footage of that. That's what's brilliant. There's actual footage of him doing that.
The idea that he came from the country, from nowhere, the bush, the frontier, and came into the city, to Sydney, made his name and took on the world in a way that no one had ever sort of even thought of before, is what brings the Bradman story so much into people's imaginations and people's hearts.
To be a great batsman, timing is everything. Exactly the same can be said about the birth of the Bradman legend. Don Bradman's rise to prominence coincided with major advances in communications. Newspaper circulation, both in Australia and overseas, was growing. The first talking picture was in 1927. Newsreels at local cinemas were coming into vogue. And of course, there was the enormous popularity of the radio. 1930 was the year that Bradman's batting talent began to gain international prominence.
Isn't that fascinating? That maybe if he was, say, a few years earlier, before newspapers were able to spread, before the radio was as popular, and before these other forms of, sort of social media back in the day, if he was slightly before then, would he have become what he actually did become? Would he have had the same success if his name wasn't being spread around like it did in the forms of the newspaper, for example? Would he have had the same success? So maybe his success, other than being clearly a great cricket player, maybe his success is a little bit of luck in the forms of people all of a sudden were able to find out who he was and what he was doing. And if he didn't have that, maybe he wouldn't have been pushed in a certain way and actually achieve as much success. And that's true in every form of life, I think. Every walk of life, in quite often you need luck. You need luck to get to certain heights. You know, it may be that, you know, if you're a footballer, for example, and it just so happens that, a scout had a day off, so thought he would go to a local game and spotted you. Just that coincidence. And that's an interesting point I really think that they've brought up, that you probably don't actually hear about that often. The sort of, yes, he's great, but how did he get spotted and noticed by a lot of people?
In January of that year, 21-year-old Don Bradman scored a phenomenal 452 not out in the amazing time of just 415 minutes. It remains the highest individual score by a first-class cricketer in Australia.
What does first class mean in terms of cricket? Something that can explain that would be great.
Well, the Australian team, captained by Mr. Woodfield, going out to field. This is the first match of their tour.
Bradman's remarkable batting feats on the 1930 tour of England would elevate him to unprecedented heights of hero status and celebrity. In the opening match of the tour at Worcester, in his first innings on English soil on the 1st of May, Bradman scored 236. By the end of May, Bradman had already scored a colossal tally of 1,000 runs. Bradman scored a record 974 runs at an average of 139.14, including a century, 2 double centuries, and a triple century.
Even I know that's incredible. I'm from England, so I do know what cricket is. I'm not completely ignorant to it. So even I know that is some feat. It is strange to see Australia, a country, facing one of our counties. I don't know if that happens very often. A country facing one of our counties. You could see the cathedral in the back there as well. I also love the fact that there is footage of this. It's fascinating to look at really, really old footage, because it's almost pictures don't almost do enough for the imagination, and that footage, actual moving footage, makes you realise, actually, this did happen, this did exist. That's what time was like back then.
Bradman extracted his revenge on Walter Robbins and the other England bowlers in the second test at Lords, when he scored a faultless 254.
England have never won a test on this ground yet, but it doesn't look like they're going to win this one the way Bradman is batting. Every time he scores something. Hardly a ball gone in this over it he hasn't scored from. Bradman's 199.
He's so calm.
Well done.
It's so relaxed. His
in the third test at
strikes.
Headingley, Bradman scored 309 in a single day.
Wow.
On his way to a then record score of 334.
Enjoying your trip to England?
Oh, having a great time, thanks.
That's the idea.
We're just having a wonderful time. The people are treating us so well that we're wondering we don't like going back home hardly enough. It's a wonderful time. But we find we're having a good deal of trouble with the weather. I don't think it's been a good summer. It's been dull, rainy most of the time. In fact, we've only had about one decent month all the time we've been here.
Even back then, they knew England was crappy weather. That is so funny. Oh, that is might be the highlight of the video, actually. Don Bradman moaning about the English weather. Brilliant.
And that was the second month after we arrived. Then, of course, with the dull weather, it makes cricket much harder. We're used to a very bright light, middle of summer, the hot weather. And when you get on these dull conditions, it makes it very awkward for you to see the ball.
One of the many.
And I try and get as many runs as I possibly can. And if in getting those runs I should happen to break any record, well, naturally, I'm very pleased, but I do not deliberately set out to try and break records.
What amazing sort of sportsmanship, and the way he speaks is I play this sport because I love this sport. Yeah, if I happen to break some records, then yeah, I break records, but I'm playing it because I love it. And that's basically what I'm getting across, and that's such a fantastic attitude to have. It really, really is.
Don Bradman finished the 1930 tour with a record total of 2,960 runs at an average of 98.66. Cricket lovers in England had never seen the like of him before, and Bradman soon became idolised by thousands of young boys throughout the country.
Our Don Bradman, what a welcome waits for you back home.
Don Bradman returned from the 1930 tour of England a national hero.
I had recently done a video on Brian Lara, and the comments about Brian Lara was that he didn't have the team to back him up like other great players. Now, I'm wondering if it's similar with Bradman. I don't know. But that little snippet there, if I can get back to it, Bradman versus England, that almost gives the impression that his team isn't that good either. Maybe completely wrong. It may be a team of stars, but he was just something special. But I'm wondering, what was the rest of his team like throughout his career? Unlike Brian Lara, where they're saying his team was nowhere near as good as him, so Brian Lara had the pressure on him to succeed.
From the 1930 tour of England, a national hero. Much to the chagrin of many of the other players, Bradman was picked up in Perth and flown ahead of the rest of the team and feted at a series of public and civic receptions.
The offer I received to go to England was a very good one. At the same time, I felt that I would like to remain in Australia if it was possible for me to do so. 3 prominent Australian business concerns made me a combined offer of a contract to remain here, which I accepted in preference to going home to the old country.
If you wind it back to...
In fact, he
was Don Bradman's dominance over the game of cricket. It was inevitable that opponents would begin to devise methods to try and curb his prolific scoring. The tactics used by England captain Douglas Jardine during the infamous 1932-33 bodyline series succeeded to the extent that Bradman's phenomenal batting average was reduced to a still very respectable 56.57. Although many of the Australian batsmen were struck and suffered injuries, most notably captain Bill Woodfull and wicket-keeper Bert Oldfield, Bradman's superior footwork and agility saw him escape injury. However, his ploy of often stepping back to the leg side to enable more scoring opportunities opened him up to accusations of not standing up to bodyline. Taking measures to curb someone's total dominance of a particular sport was not just reserved for Don Bradman. There was another Australian sporting hero in the 1930s whose total dominance of his sport prompted a change in the rules.
This isn't something new. This isn't something new at all. The prime example is Pelé. Pelé from Brazil. Teams would try and foul him. Back in the day, it was quite common to say, well, your first tackle is free, basically. You're not going to get punished for making a bad first tackle. This isn't the case anymore, can I stress. But back in the day, what you would find is when you've got a player that is so good like Pelé, every player from the team would completely wipe that player out because they knew how good he was. They knew that person, like Pelé, would destroy them. So, yeah, it's not something new, and I can certainly understand why players would do it. I really do understand why players would do it, because you don't want to get beaten. You've got to find ways to overcome it.
His determination and his perfectionism is that he played billiards against the world's best, Walter Lindrum, who wiped the table before Don could even play a stroke. So he practiced and he practiced and he practiced, and when he had a return game against Lindrum, he said, well, it's only fair that I break. And he broke, and he sank every ball for 147, and I just can't imagine a look on Lindrum's face. It's terrifying that a man can be that good by choice when he sets his heart to it.
He was good at anything he really took up, like he was a good classic pianist, he was a good billiard player, he was a good golfer, and he didn't pretend he was good. You didn't know he was good. He didn't tell you. He was that type of bloke.
Some people are like that, aren't they? They're just good at everything. And I'm sure most people could think of someone that's like that is just good at everything they put their hands to.
Mrs. Bradman, followed by Don, leaves her hotel en route to catch the boat train at Victoria on their way back to Australia. It will be remembered that Mrs. Bradman rushed to England when her husband's health gave cause for anxiety after his operation for appendicitis. Now he is fit and cheery once more, but inclined to be reticent when questioned as to how soon he expects to be playing cricket again.
In 1934, on the tour of England, he wasn't quite himself. He was still making runs fairly plentifully, and when he made 304 in the Leeds test, everyone said, well, he's okay. But after the Oval test, where he made only 244, things went wrong, and he suddenly collapsed with peritonitis, and he was at one moment given up for dead.
In those days, you normally didn't recover from peritonitis. So everybody assumed that he was going to die. And when a great cricketer, or great anybody, great personality, if you like, is going to die, I mean, let's take David Beckham as an example. If Beckham were to keel over tomorrow with peritonitis and we look at him dying, it'd be the same thing. It'd be front page news everywhere, and in those days, of course, it was the same with Bradman. And the King wanted to know all about it, and people gave blood, and people stood outside the hospital.
Message was got to his wife in faraway Adelaide, or Sydney then, and you couldn't get to England in a hurry. The offer was to fly her part of the way and then go by ship. She must have been a very, very worried woman. She sent out a brave message, though, "I'm coming, Don," and that must have cheered him up.
Wow. And I think people certainly take for granted, granted still, it takes a long time to get from, say, England to Australia still, but I think we take for granted how easy it is to travel and how easy communication is these days. I'm communicating with people from Australia like that. You couldn't do that then, obviously, and I think we take for granted that. And you can imagine the technology wasn't there for the hospitals to treat, for example. So there would have been that worry. As they're saying, they would have expected him to die because the treatment and the recovery and things wasn't as good back then, obviously. So you take these things for granted. And yeah, you can feel very sorry for his wife in the fact that she must have been worried sick. And it would have taken a long time to get from Australia to England back then. So, yeah, we take things for granted.
During his periods of consciousness. But he was nearly lost. Sir Douglas Shields, the Australian surgeon, helped to save his life. And Jessie got to England to find him looking quite well, but it was a very near thing, and they convalesced. King George had shown concern, perhaps not just because he admired him as a cricketer, he'd shaken his hand at Lord's, but he reasoned that Don Bradman was a pretty important ingredient in the Empire picture. England was proud of him too, in a weird sort of way.
Don and Jessie Bradman's love match was both a long and enduring partnership.
It was the most extraordinary and happy marriage. Jessie was the only person who could contradict him, who could say, "Come on, Don, you don't mean that, do you, Don?" And he would accept that. He wouldn't accept it from anybody else. But I think that partnership was really quite extraordinary. You don't see marriages like that.
Another thing you take for granted, remember back in the day, it was the way, you know, I think the women had to stay quiet and do as they're told. But to hear that it's almost like they were living in our era, because as I've said in previous videos, Charlie thinks I'm a prat, and she will tell me when I'm being an idiot and I'm stubborn and whatnot, and she will tell me off. So it's lovely to hear that their relationship was like that, because that's a real relationship, isn't it? That's your equals. You should be able to tell each other when you've done wrong, as well as when you've done good. You know, I love that. That's brilliant.
Often.
When he found Jessie, when they were kids, I suppose that was the most important ingredient in his long life, because she was there almost all the way, and she must have been the most tremendous support and comfort to him.
Yeah. Behind every great man is a great woman, as they say. And to be great, you need the support. You need the support, for sure. What a record, eh? What a record he had. I made the statement that, was Brian Lara the greatest batsman in history? Was Sir Donald George Bradman the greatest batsman in history? That's the question. Well, really, really interesting to learn. This is what I'm here for, to learn. If I'm going to look at cricket, I've always said cricket is not the sport that I would watch, because I don't find it that exciting. I will give it a try. We've got the T20 World Cup coming up. I will give it a go. But it's amazing learning about the history of people and the actual individuals and the actual clubs that make up those sports. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you've learned something as well about Don Bradman. I'll catch you next time.